As you may know, I am currently studying at St Paul University in Ottawa, where I am pursuing a Master's of Arts in Theology. Last semester, part of the work of the course I was taking was to conduct a research project in a Christian community. With Arlene and Sandy's permission as our church wardens, I undertook this project here at St Clare's. The research questions this project was meant to answer were: how do the parishioners of St Clare's define mission? And in what way do they see St Clare's as engaging in mission? As part of this project, I drew on our diocesan definition of mission, which is engagement with the local community, and compared that definition to what our parishioners came up with. There were two primary methods of research I undertook as part of my research here at St. Clare's. First, I reviewed material content generated by St. Clare's, such as our website and social media posts, meeting minutes, and the like. Second, I conducted interviews of parishioners, as well as of one previous incumbent of the parish. Altogether, I conducted 7 interviews with 9 participants. I will be quoting from the interviews during this presentation, but without providing any information that could identify interviewees, since the interviews were conducted with a guarantee of anonymity. Interviewees may choose to identify themselves if they wish, but I will not do so. This means that I won't quote much from the previous incumbent whom I interviewed, since their answers are more likely to make it easy to identify them. To keep the presentation to a reasonable length, I will only have a few quotes per question, but I could have added many more. Why present the findings of this project, and why now? The timing of this presentation was suggested to be by my course instructor. First of all, vestry is next week, so now is a good time to talk about something that might be a topic of conversation at vestry. Second, the readings from Scripture for today can be interpreted to be connected with the idea of mission, particularly the Gospel reading, which is taken from the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew's Gospel, in which Jesus says, "You are the salt of the earth, and you are the light of the world," to his hearers, declarations which have missional overtones. I wanted to present my findings to the parish, first of all, because research of this kind is meant to be made publicly accessible, particularly to the community which was the object of research. Second, I hope that my findings will be of benefit to the parish. I know I learned a lot undertaking this project, and I hope that this presentation gives you something to think on, to reflect on. I asked a variety of questions of different interviewees, but there were a few questions that most of the interviews had in common. The first was to ask interviewees what the word mission meant to them. Here's what they had to say. Mission to me would be reaching out, talking to people in the community, seeing what their needs are, and then coming up with something to help those people. Mission means to me the way in which the sermons and so on are presented to the congregation. Our mission within St. Clare's is to minister to the needs of the Anglican community, but also we have outreach to those who are not Anglicans. We welcome them into the services. I then asked parishioners what they thought of mission as defined as engagement with the local community beyond the walls of the church. One said, "Mission is going out in the community physically." Another said, "I would think of when we have the dinners and outside groups come into the church and are served lunches." Still another, maybe rather than individuals supporting the food bank, we should be doing it through the parish so that the community sees us doing that. Another said, "There's something about the words beyond the walls of the church that just made me think of this idea of us leaving our comfort zone and entering into a community where maybe others might feel more comfortable. I then asked, in what ways does St. Clare's engage with the local community beyond its walls? And I said to one interviewee, with things like the angel tree, would you say it's fair to say that, while it's engaging with the wider community, we're not directly engaging, it's at a remove? And they responded, I would agree with that. One said, I don't think very much. For Chesterville, nothing ever happens with our church there anymore. I think we're just Winchester. Another said, I think that there was some concern that our free spaghetti supper didn't go over as well, because it was free. But again, there's the opposite side that says we can't afford to do a free supper. We've got to make people pay for it. There are those two sides to it, and I don't see the resolution to that. Another said, sometimes I feel like it would be nice to have more engaging in wider community that isn't fundraising. I think a lot of how we engage with the wider community is through fundraising for the church. I also asked, how do you think other parishioners perceive our engagement with the wider community? One said, I think some of them are looking at, say, musical concerts. That would be another one that could be mission maybe. Like musical concerts or the Mother's Day breakfast, Shrove Tuesday, that when people come into the church building, we're doing mission work. So I think that there's a disconnect to what mission is. I asked, how do you think other parishioners perceive our engagement with the wider community? One interviewee responded, how do parishioners in our own church? I don't think they think of it. Another said, I don't think there's a uniformity of feelings, that's all I would say. That there be people that feel like us, and there be people that don't feel like us. I also looked at a lot of the material content generated by St. Clare's to see if that said anything about our engagement with the wider community. On our About page on the parish website, among other things it says, we also put on community suppers, fundraisers, and have a catering ministry that is very active within our local community. On our rentals page it says, our hope is that our new facilities will be able to serve the ministry needs of our wider community. So the emphasis on our website, our primary public face to the world, is that it is inviting the wider community into our building. That is our primary way of engaging with it. Our website implies that we want to relate to the wider community chiefly in a transactional rather than relational manner. The funny thing is, despite the emphasis on our website about inviting the wider community into our building for fundraisers and the like, on our social media, we don't actually promote events at the church very often. I looked at all of the posts on our Instagram up to the start of November 2025, and over 200 posts on Facebook between the start of September 2024 to the start of November 2025. Of the 73 posts on Instagram I analyzed, only 6 were about fundraisers hosted at St. Clare's or events catered by St. Clare's. On our parish Facebook page, of the 216 posts I analyzed, only 6 were about fundraisers hosted at St. Clare's. And if we look at posts on our Facebook page having to do with going out into the wider community, there was only one such post. And it is debatable whether it actually counts as engagement with the wider community, since it was about the dedication of a plaque at the St. John's Anglican Cemetery in Chrysler, which is under our parish's oversight. So even if we grant that transactional events, such as fundraisers, count as engagement with the wider community, we don't highlight such engagement on our social media pages. Now, this is fine if we regard our social media as being for the benefit chiefly of our own parishioners, but we might want to consider adopting a different strategy if the purpose of our social media is to connect with the wider community. There's a lot more data from my analysis of the parish's material content and from interviews that I could present, but what I've shown you today shows first that there is no consensus at a parish level as to what constitutes mission or engagement with the wider community, or what such engagement does or should look like. And second, our official communications emphasize a transactional approach to such engagement. I present this information to you today for a number of reasons, of which the two most important are, first, I believe that our parish should strive for a common vision as to what mission is and how to go about it. The second reason, which is the impetus for the first, is that I am led to understand that missional churches, that is, churches that engage with the wider community of which they are a part in relational terms, are more likely to thrive in the long term than churches that engage with the wider community in transactional terms. I should say that this conclusion is chiefly based on anecdotal evidence, and ideally I would dig deeper to try to find empirical evidence for it. However, we may not have the time to wait. According to one of the instructors in the missional leadership course that Arlene, Sandy, and I are taking, it can take up to 10 years for a church to transition to a missional approach. Based on the age of our core of parishioners, if we want to become a church that thrives because of its missional approach to engagement with the wider community, we need to start making that transition now, or at least soon. In any case, I want to offer thanks to all of the parishioners who agreed to be interviewed, to Arlene and Sandy for allowing me to do my research project here at St. Clare's, and to you for your attention today. Thank you very much.